First time she was taken away when I was 4, I just absorbed all that pain.
Yeah.
Because she was numb.
Yes.
And I'm a bit numb right now, obviously.
Yeah.
But it's the illness that made everything so much worse. And there is nothing worse than watching someone you love suffer. Suffer.
Yeah.
And she suffered. I don't know, throughout her life, I really don't know of any suffering like that. I mean, there are illnesses, there are physical illnesses that are obviously horrible, and I'm not. But there is a mental illness in which you can't even get a grip on your own illness, in which you can't even grip what's happening to you because the illness itself is disorienting you.
Yes, exactly.
And that is it is, and I just think of all the people that suffer from this and have suffered from this without any help. And there are drugs, and my mother was successfully eventually the treatments began to work. Of course, it doesn't mean underneath all the drugs you also don't have a personality that happens to be extremely difficult or awkward or just
absolutely
like
right. Yeah,
perfectly frank. So you don't want to define their entire personality by this illness. On the other hand, the illness is so prominent and it so disguises itself as reality that it is a huge challenge for people and families and elsewhere to deal with. And there, I got that off my chest.
Yes, and it's a really important side of things is obviously her suffering was horrific, but this transgenerational element is very strong. It has caused you to suffer. It doesn't necessarily mean that you will suffer every mental illness that she suffered or every disorder, but there is a form of transgenerational suffering in both directions when a child has a mother or indeed a parent has a child who has a mental illness and is in that kind of pain. It's a different order because it is pain. And I think one of the moments that really clarified a lot for me was not my own experience, but when I was making this film about the illness bipolar or manic depression, as it's also called, I met this man who had been a commander in the Royal Navy and had actually got the job of being in charge of the Royal Yacht Britannia back in the day. And he suffered terribly from bipolar disorder, and he had some psychotic episodes, some really bad time, and eventually he had to leave his post as commander of Britannia and was sent by the Navy to a hospital and in Portsmouth. And one day he escaped the quite light security around it, and he walked out in front of an enormous truck. And it didn't kill him, but it smashed his legs such that over a period of years he had to have the bones constantly rebroken and reset. And he was telling me about this, and he said, firstly, I know a lot of your viewers will say, how could you do that to the truck driver? And that lives with me every day. It was a monstrous way to try and take my own life, to involve someone else, and I'm aware of that. He said, but what I really want your viewers to understand, he was a wonderful old boy, he raised his trouser leg and showed me the unbelievable scars, like a relief map of the Himalayas each leg was. It was horrific, shiny, terrible scars on both legs. He said, you can imagine the pain I went through, and I'm still in to some extent in those legs. But what your readers have to understand is that pain in my legs was nothing compared to the pain inside me that made me run out in front of that truck. And that's what you have to know about this illness. It is capable of giving you a pain which is so unendurable that it's impossible to express. And I thought, yes. And a lot of people with mental illness they know they're unhappy, they know there's an inside them, but they haven't used the word pain because pain seems to be a word that comes from physiology and the body rather than the mind. As you say, this whole Cartesian separation seems so strong still in us as people. But one of the problems we have now, I'm president of the largest charity in Britain for mental health, which is called Mind. And I'm not speaking on behalf of them when I say this, but it seems to me there is a really urgent need for us to address and understand these kinds of mental illness. A lot of attention should be paid to them. They are what you might call endogenous. They come from inside. They are either genetic or they are formed in one as a disease from an early age, like asthma or predisposition to asthma. They're a chronic disease you have. But at the same time, we now have in the discourse, as you might call it, in social media, on television, in real life, in schools, in teaching, we have another form of mental illness that you might call exogenous, which is young people being triggered, to use a word they are likely to use, into states of anxiety and unhappiness by external things. It's not an illness inside them like your mother's or I suppose mine, but it's, oh God, my exams, my student debt, the fact that I can't get a mortgage, the way my boyfriend treats me with his coercive behavior. I'm not belittling these things. I'm absolutely not. But they are of a different order in the same way that breaking an arm by falling off a tree is a real physical problem that has to be dealt with by a doctor, but it's not the same as dealing with pancreatic cancer.